Good evening, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to the last Friday night Pink and preview show of the season. Norwich City travel to Barnsley tomorrow for the final game of the Championship campaign. They go there already as champions, but of course we're going to have the trophy lift tomorrow. So I think irrespective of what's going to happen, Pad, it's already going to be a pretty good day for Norwich City, isn't it, regardless of the result? But as Daniel Farker alluded to today, and obviously you were in his press conference, 99 points is better than 96, and Norwich have very high standards. So they'll travel to Oakwell and be very keen to get those 3 points.
Yeah, certainly. I wasn't old enough, but I've just had a flashback to like a memory of a musical tune, which is from a German singer called Nena, 99 Red Balloons.
Go on, give us a rendition.
Oh, no. YouTube it, I mean, we're going way back there. We're going just about non-black and white. But, that was a very big tune in the day. 99 Red Balloons, 99 league points. That would be nice, yeah. I didn't really buy that when he was giving us that, if I'm brutally honest. I think I don't think he's too bothered if they get 99, 96, 97, really. It's, the job is done. For me, two things about tomorrow, and we'll get into it in plenty of depth. It's Grant Hanley lifting the trophy, because that's the iconic moment when all that hard work, the culmination of that comes together. And it's the farewell to Alex Tettey and Mario Vrancic. That's the two key things for me tomorrow, and I'd imagine for the majority of Norwich fans. So, bit of a juxtaposition, the joy of the trophy lift, and then the sadness at the realisation, which Daniel gave us his reaction today and was very good. Just the emotion of it all. What a pair of servants those two lads have been, and we've seen the reaction from many Norwich fans, and I'm sure we'll get plenty on here tonight. It is sad. But that, unfortunately, is what football's about. It cycles, and players come to the end, managers come to the end, and they have to move on. And as Daniel said earlier, probably now isn't the time to discuss or dissect the reasons why him and Webber have arrived at those two selection calls, but it's more about celebrating what those two have brought to Norwich in their own unique way. But it will be quite a pleasant, I would imagine, experience for a Norwich fan watching that game tomorrow, because there isn't anything materially on it in terms of 99 points, but not really in the grand scheme of things. So it will be quite a party, but just with that underlying, because I'm sure without picking Daniel's side, I'd be amazed if both Mario and Alex don't get some game time tomorrow. So from afar, unfortunately, obviously, but I'm sure the Norwich fans will cheer when those lads are on the pitch. So bit of a conflicted emotions, I think, going into tomorrow's game for me.
Yeah, we've seen, if you haven't seen, actually, there's a nice video on the club's social media account of sort of pictures that they've put up of Alex Tettey and Mario Vrancic around the training ground today ahead of the final game of the season. And we'll delve into, I guess, Tettey probably more in just a minute. But of course, if you've got any questions or comments, me and Pad will be with you for the next 45 minutes or so, providing we get the ammunition of the comments and stuff to keep going. So make sure you keep providing those. But it's going to be interesting, isn't it? Because Alex Tettey is a man who has spanned eras. I think it's 4 or 5 managers, permanent Norwich City managers, that he's played under. He seems to have been someone, regardless of style or sometimes even league or sometimes even situation, that has been viewed as a reliable sort of player. Not necessarily at first. We've seen several managers maybe try, and Daniel Farker was one, try and do it without Alex Tettey before realising, actually, no, I do need to bring him back into the starting 11. What for you has made him such a reliable player across the last 9 years or so?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was interesting that at the outset of Daniel's reign, and obviously wrote about earlier in the week, the watershed was that heavy defeat at Millwall when Norwich was so open across midfield. It was, painful to watch that given day. It certainly was for Daniel, because thereafter Alex Tettey came back in from the cold and never looked back, really. And obviously age has caught up with him to a degree, and Ollie Skip, as he referenced today, his form, the consistency that he's shown, really limited his game time to the odd cameo towards the end of games this season. But I think it's probably just every manager has looked at him, and I mean, Alex Neil called him one of a kind in his squad at that period. But they've looked at him and probably thought, there's a reliable, I'm trying to put 11 players on the pitch. I need a certain portion of them to sort of offer me 6, 7 out of 10 every week, day in, day out, both in training and on a game day. And he more often than not would deliver. He was always a very wholehearted player. You could debate, his technical ability. I mean, he scored some absolutely unbelievable goals. And Daniel again said today, cutting through all the eulogies, he was a very, very good player. Played for Norway for many years, played in France, played for a top club in Norway, Rosenborg. So, maybe he was a little bit underappreciated as a technical player. And of course, I think there's a case to say probably in the last season or so under Farker, that aspect of his game probably did come on a little bit, under the guidance of Daniel and what he wants from his midfield players. But I think probably the one trait was that reliability, hence why he had 5 or 6 managers. He's hopefully going to clock up, 263 appearances if he plays tomorrow. And the fact he's been in 9 years at this level of the game is pretty unheard of these days. I mean, we obviously had Wes not that long ago, but, these players now are an increasingly rare commodity, one club players effectively. And obviously Norfolk suited him. He had a young family that they've started to grow up here. He talked about, once the decision came through, about it's going to be tough for his 2 young children to go back to Norway, and because all they've known is Norwich and growing up around here. And, he immersed himself in Norfolk life like a lot of players do. And when they come back, ex-players, and obviously Norwich as a club was the perfect fit for him. So I think it's just been a very mutual, beneficial relationship. And of course, he goes with 2 championship winners' medals, 3 promotions, that unforgettable season that culminated at Wembley. He should be remembered rightly, as Daniel said today. He is a Norwich City legend in the modern sense of the word for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll hear from Daniel in just a minute. But, Pad, we also saw that he was awarded with the April Player of the Month, which I think fans have voted for. 2 minutes of football, I think 1 minute against Derby and 1 minute in, I think, the last game of the month. I forget who that was against. I'm sure that someone will be able to point it out. And it's probably really, I've seen some supporters say, given they're not in the stadium, it's probably the only real recognition they can pay to him. We've seen obviously the picture of that famous smile. It's going to be strange, isn't it? Seeing a Norwich City side, a Norwich City squad. I know he's not played much this year, but to see maybe someone else wear the 27 shirt, it's just going to be a little bit surreal, maybe given his contribution and given his sort of his service to the club.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't quite on the Carlo Nash dominating the Player of the Year vote, but it wasn't far off, was it? To be fair, as you say, 2 minutes. That was some 2 minutes. It must have passed me by, that 2 minutes, but
well, to be fair, one of those minutes was at Derby, and he made that very important block. So
you're right. Yeah, probably got them the win that day. Actually, yeah. Thinking about it, yeah. But let's be honest. I think if you want to stack up the assists and the goals, Kieran Dowd scored a pretty good goal at Derby that day, didn't he? To be fair. So I'll tell you what I did see though. On a serious note, in terms of his impact and not being here next season and how strange that will be. Somebody put on social earlier about, there probably will be times, certainly in the Premier League next season, where Alex Tettey, the person, as much as Alex Tettey, the player, around the dressing room and around the camp and his experience will be hugely missed. That tweet was talking about how Ewan and Malky moved on when the Worthington team came up, and Norwich probably missed that leadership and that kind of streetwise edge almost, and that will be the case, and that's why it's very brave on one level to make the call if you're Webber and Farker, because it would probably be easier to keep Alex Tettey around for those elements. We've seen a new deal for Michael McGovern in terms of age. He's very similar age to Alex, and he's not obviously going to be the first choice if Tim Krul stays fit, and we assume maybe Orjan Nyland extends his stay here. But they've clearly valued Michael McGovern in and around the place, and there is probably a case you could have constructed for why Alex couldn't have stayed. But ultimately, I think it probably is the right call if you look at it purely in footballing terms, rather than their influence around the place. He hasn't played really this season. Whether it's only Skip or it's somebody else, they will address that position in the summer. Kenny McLean's there as well. Lucas Rupp's in the mix. So purely in footballing terms, I don't think you could have much of a counter argument. It's more about somebody who's been part of the fixtures and fittings. And Stuart Webber said it, when he paid his tribute, that they had to kind of convince him to stay when he wasn't getting a look in, because they did value that leadership element. And as I say, to his credit, he stayed, got himself back into the team, and played his part, albeit more off the pitch than on the pitch this season. So huge credit to him.
We've already seen him throughout his Norwich City career. He's been linked with a return to Rosenborg. We've already seen their manager come out, former Norwich City player as well, talk about maybe trying to lure Tettey back to Rosenborg. We know he's going to Trondheim, I think it's pronounced, which is essentially his home club, hometown rather, in Norway. That's where Rosenborg play football. He's already spoke about potentially moving into the academy coaching route. I don't think he wants to be a manager by any stretch of the imagination, but it's interesting already that we're seeing Rosenborg, which is still a pretty big club in Norway, very keen to take him. So it kind of underlines what Daniel spoke about his qualities as a player, Pad, doesn't it?
Certainly does, yeah. And you could understand why Arga Harida, I think, is at Rosenborg, isn't he, as well? So, an ex-Norwich person. So, yeah. For I don't know the setup of Rosenborg, but why wouldn't you want somebody with that wealth of experience to bring on young players? And his next move for me will be quite an interesting one, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely will, and we'll of course watch it with interest. Just before we hear from Daniel Farke today and what he had to say on Tettey, Pat, a quick word for Mario Vrancic, someone who I think if you were going to compile a list of really special moments during Norwich City's 2 promotion seasons, there'd probably be very few that doesn't contain a Mario Vrancic influence, and that probably shows what he is, a big player in big moments, isn't he? Someone who can score wonderful goals. The free kick against Sheffield Wednesday, the free kick against Wickham, the moment against Birmingham, the assist for Max Aarons the 2 assists against Sheffield Wednesday, really key moments within seasons that he's contributed to. The goal against Blackburn, we could go on. He's been a player for the big moments for Norwich City.
Well, Daniel said today his football brain is world class. And you'd have to agree, not even talking about set pieces, but seeing a pass, the vision to execute it as well. Probably the only thing that has held him back, because he obviously came through at a decent level in Germany, was probably the athleticism aspect and the power and the physicality, particularly in the modern era. In terms of his ability, his technical ability, he's second to none. Stuart Webber said he's the best 2-footed player he's worked with, at any club, which is a huge credit to Mario Vrancic. So, yeah, I think there's still plenty of football left in that man. And again, a bit like Alex, I'll be very interested to see where he goes next.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, here's what Daniel Farke had to say at his press conference today about Alex Tettey and Mario Vrancic.
I've more than one tear in my eye when I think about them both, because not just 2 fantastic football players, but also 2 great personalities. It was a joy and really a privilege also for me to be allowed to work with them each and every day. And right now it's also not the time perhaps to speak about why we had to take this decision anyhow together with them. It's more like also to celebrate their quality and their personality, and also to speak about what they have done for the club, and is amazing, and they will be always remembered. Yeah, I think Alex plays as a Norwich City legend in the history books. Is you can't deny this, and what a great human being he is, and what a privilege it is, not just to work with him, but also to be allowed to spend more or less each and every day in my last 4 years with him. Of course, both we also liked the summer break, when it was also possible perhaps for a few days not to see each other, but otherwise I have to say, so it's really a joy to be allowed to work with such a quality player, but also with such a quality human being of like Alex Tettey, and the same with Mario.
There you go. That's what Daniel Farke had to say on the departure of his 2 experienced midfielders. I'm fully expecting, if not from the start, to see a midfield of Tettey and Vrancic again at some point, like we saw at Carrow Road, particularly given that Ollie Skipp is injured, Pad, which seems like a nice segue onto the injury news that we've had this week. We, of course, saw him in a protective boot, didn't we, on crutches during Norwich City's title celebrations last week. That's subsequently been clarified as a metatarsal injury, one that's going to need surgery, about a 12-week layoff. What does that do in terms both of Norwich City's hopes of getting him, but equally for his pre-season, whether he's at Norwich or at Spurs?
It's a hard one to call. I've seen one trainer thought that the fact he's injured now for talking about 12 weeks, which would put it to the end of July. does that improve Norwich's chances? Because he won't really be an available option for another club. And obviously Norwich know exactly what they're getting with that player. That's obviously with the massive caveat. We don't know what happens at Tottenham. And that will ultimately dictate it. New head coach to go in there. What does he think of Ollie Skipp? Does he want to have a look at him with a view to bringing him into the first team? Or, does he feel, as Jose clearly did, that he's probably a little bit too far away from Tottenham's 11? Again, we won't know that until the new man's unveiled at some point. But I don't know. I just thought it was quite telling, wasn't it? The Stuart Webber throwaway line in the press release, which even that, the fact that it was nominally about Mario and Alex leaving, but hinged onto that was Xavi Quintella's loan ending, Ollie Skipp's loan ending, and then with Ollie Skipp, it was we'd love to work with him in the future. I just thought, Stuart Webber's not a man who does anything without a reason. So, is there wheels within wheels? Daniels talked openly about he'd love to get him back, and unfortunately, that's going to be something that's a slow burner over the summer, and that was prior to the injury. So, I think you can read between the lines. Norwich would dearly love that man to come back. And if you're Ollie Skipp, aside from the injury aspect, I guess you're looking at it. And if Tottenham isn't going to provide him with that first team opportunity next season, I think he'd probably fancy coming back because he knows he's going to play regularly at Norwich as he did this season. So it's the great imponderable now, because I'm sure Norwich were planning, hopefully, maybe to get him in a bit earlier in pre-season, even if they had to jump through a few hoops with Tottenham's new head coach. Now, 12 weeks probably before he can do any sort of training, and then you have to add on a few extra weeks. So I think it's probably looking less likely now, if I'm honest, than probably it would have been prior to this injury. It's terrible news, really.
Yeah, it is. And I don't want to burn out sort of everything that we've got to say on Ollie Skipp, because like you say, I feel like this is something that we're going to be discussing quite a lot throughout the summer. And of course, we maybe won't do these to the same extent, but we'll of course still drop in during the summer as and when. But yeah, Ollie Skipp, you get he's going to be a player that I think dominates much of the discourse around this upcoming transfer window. Of course, he's been superb for Norwich City, and like you say, Pat, I think there's so much water to flow under the bridge in terms of what Spurs decide to do, who they decide to appoint. 12 weeks is going to eat into his pre-season, so is the Spurs boss really going to get a proper look at him? There's so many sort of interesting lines, I think, to take from this before we can even speak about whether he ends up back at Norwich City. But what I did want to ask you is in terms of how Norwich City prepare, because as we said there, a decision is likely to go late into the summer, probably irrespective of his injury or his length of pre-season. In terms of what Norwich City need to do, is it then about bringing in another player in that position who's capable of starting, with a view to maybe getting the bonus of having Ollie Skipp back? Or is it everything hinging on Ollie Skipp? I think the way we know Norwich operate, there tends to be various sort of contingency plans in place. How do you think they'll play it in terms of that position this summer?
Well, the scenario you paint is the one I think they're going to have to go with now. I think they're going to have been obviously linked with one or two other alternatives, some with some merit, some just names seemingly plucked out of hats and popped into gossip columns. But I don't think, to repeat what I just said a minute ago, I don't think now Ollie Skipp isn't available till the best case scenario, maybe a week or so before the season. And he's certainly not going to be at a match fit level because he'll have barely had any pre-season. You can't go into the Premier League with him in your starting 11, I don't think. Unless, as I say, he's a very young man. If he rehabs very well, he shortens that timescale and it isn't 12 weeks and maybe it's early July instead of later July, then maybe the plates shift a little bit. But I think it has to be. Particularly now with Alex Tettey leaving and obviously Mario to a less extent, because it's not like for like in terms of that role in midfield. But they're going to have to press ahead now and actually bring in another target. And then, of course, if Ollie Skipp was available, you'd take him all day long. But I don't think the way Farker and Webber would want to work this summer is reliant on basically Ollie Skipp rehabbing well and being available into the Premier League season. I think whoever they've got earmarked for that position, they basically want in that yellow shirt on the opening day of the season, fit and ready to go. So, but as I say, there's no doubt about it. If the planets align, they'd love to take him again.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll see how it unfolds during the summer. It's going to be fascinating to see where Ollie Skipp is playing his football on the opening day of the season. I'm not sure he quite knows yet. So good luck for the rest of us. In terms of the other injury this week, Teemu Pukki, obviously a major blow, really, in terms of his prospects for the Euros, and I guess for him it was probably the big concern that he would pick up an injury that maybe would. Maybe not rule him out of the competition, but certainly hinder his chances of playing there. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity, really, for him, isn't it? The first time Finland have qualified for a major competition. Just talk to us a little bit about your understanding of that injury and where he is in terms of playing for his country at the European Championships this summer.
Well, I mean, I've seen some quotes from the Finland end that they're reasonably confident he'll be able to join up with their camp before the Euros and basically on you go. So they're obviously optimistic. The message is, we're kind of getting from other sources that maybe that isn't quite the case. I thought Daniel today was, he said he was carefully or cautiously optimistic he'd be fit for the Euros, but he also made the point, we have to see how well he responds to the treatment. He's only literally starting his rehab again. Now, I don't think it's beyond I haven't actually, if I'm honest, checked the actual dates of when the Euros start for Finland, but it's got to be early June, hasn't it? So we're only talking a month away now. It's an ankle ligament injury. We don't know the extent or the severity of it. But Kira Dow, was out for 3 months, plus with an ankle ligament injury. One or two other players have had ankle issues as well. So a little bit of a parallel with Ollie Skipp there. Will Teemu Pukki be at 100% fit and firing a month from now? I don't think he will. So are we basically, or if you're Finland, are you basically saying, well, we know how important he is. He's pretty much single-handedly got him there in the first place. Do you basically go with a Teemu Pukki at 65, 70%? My concern, and that's what I put to Daniel earlier, is the impact on Norwich. And that's a selfish Norwich-centric view of this situation. But ultimately, hypothetically, we'll say they get him to the tournament, he plays, he isn't anywhere near fit, he breaks down again, then he could be out for a period of time. And then it overlaps into Norwich and their Premier League season, which, would be, as was seen 2 seasons ago, the reliance on him was far too great. And when he did have that injury for the second part of the season, much like Norwich, he nosedived in terms of his influence on the pitch, and so did Norwich. Norwich will not want to be in that situation again where they're so overly reliant on one man. So I think, well, Daniel was quite honest today. He said that from the selfish point of view, you don't really want him playing in Euros because that'll allow him then to rehab properly over the summer. And he'll be fit and he'll be firing and he'll be fresh because he's played a lot of football in the last 2-3 years for club and country. But the other side of that equation, again, Daniel touched on it. He's spoken about this is his lifetime's ambition to lead Finland to an historic first ever Euros. He is, as we know, he's a bit of a god in Finland. He will want to be there and at his optimum best. And that isn't going to be the case, I don't think. He will be at Barnsley tomorrow, as well as Skipp, taking part in the celebrations, but he's still got his foot in a protective boot. He's rehabbing now. Norwich are in close cooperation with their Finnish counterparts, but we'll see. I mean, like I say, experience tells you that he's not going to be 100% when the Euros come round. So if he's not 100%, there's a huge risk element in terms of his fitness and Norwich and the Premier League kickoff. And I would imagine Norwich probably were, well, we've discussed this, Norwich are probably already in the market for a striker anyway to alleviate some of the issues they encountered 2 seasons ago. And that search probably intensifies now because, even if he doesn't break down, what state is he potentially going to be in coming out of that Euros? He'll have, flogged himself again. It is a concern, no 2 ways about it.
Is there, I mean, you spoke there about from the Norwich perspective and it being the selfish Norwich perspective, maybe that he completes his rehab, he doesn't play in the Euros and he leads Norwich then into the Premier League. But if that situation did pan out, is the other side a point to be made about happiness? And maybe you wouldn't have a fully happy, content Teemu Pukki knowing that he's just missed out on the Euros behind him. And actually that may affect his performance in the Premier League for Norwich City. So it's a really difficult one to try and manage both for Teemu Pukki and for Norwich, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I sensed that was the path Daniel was trying to navigate today, that if you're the club, you just say, no, mate, we pay your wages. You are going to be parked for the summer. You're not fit. You shouldn't be going off and playing for your country in a major tournament because we need you for the Premier League. But the reality is, he is such an important figure for Finland. It means so much to him, and he's been such an unbelievable servant for his club. How could you possibly stand in the way of that man? And ultimately, what will happen is what happens whenever a tournament comes around or qualifiers, is that the protocol will be players have to be released by clubs to their countries, and then the country's own medical staff will assess him. So, that's clearly what's going to happen. Norwich don't have any say in that matter. And if the Finnish medical staff, in conjunction with the player, feel they can get a programme around him that can bring him to a point where at least he can declare himself available, then I think we all know that's definitely going to happen. But, ultimately, could you stand in the way of the player? No. And if they were to do that, and I think you're right, I think he'd be well within his rights to maybe question, not maybe question, is he at the right club? Because you never get the sense looking at him that he's that type of character anyway, who would down tools or cause problems because he feels wronged by the club over this decision. I think ultimately, he's an experienced player and he will understand where the club are coming from. But equally, it means so much to him. I think it would be counterproductive if Norwich were to almost put the foot down and say, no, you can't link up because we don't think physically you're in the right state. So hence why I thought Daniel was pretty cautious with it today. And ultimately, this has only happened since the Reading game. We're only less than a week into his rehab. But like I said with Ollie Skip earlier, he might defy us and recover very well. And the motivation to be leading the line for Finland is enough to ensure that he's fit and ready. But I don't know, just in the back of my head, I just think that back to that Premier League season, he did that toe injury at Leicester and he was never the same player again. And he tried to play through it, didn't he? Because he was so important to Norwich. You could almost draw a parallel there. But let's be honest, the Pukki in the second half of the Premier League season was not the Pukki in the first half. Certainly not the Pukki we've seen in the Championship. So that would be my concern, that maybe history repeats itself a little bit. And in playing through, he doesn't do himself justice maybe for Finland. And then have you got an option available for the start of the Premier League who is really going to be able to trouble Premier League defences?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what Norwich City do this summer in terms of that position. Of course, they've got Jordan Hugill and Adam Ida as well. Ida's had a difficult season in terms of injuries, obviously coronavirus diagnosis as well. A limited football really in terms of his development. Is now the opportunity for Norwich City to get him out on loan to a Championship club for a season of football. And what does that look like in terms of incomings? Do they then sign a striker on loan or on a permanent basis? It's going to be really interesting to see. We've got heaps of comments, so I'll try and get through them now, or a few of them now. Calvin has just said hello, so good evening, Calvin. Oliver as well. Hi, Paul has said great job all season. I presume he's talking about us, but thank you, Paul. We've definitely not chucked that one in there. So
I doubt it, Connor. I doubt it.
But if you are talking about us, thank you very much, Paul. Dubai Canary on YouTube has said, hi guys, do you think Barnsley will be resting players for the playoffs? We certainly saw that 2 years ago, didn't we, with Aston Villa when Norwich went there on the final day and there was no Grealish, no Mings, no Abraham. They rested quite a big cohort of their squad ahead of the playoffs, which was obviously a good decision because they went on to win them in the end. Do you expect Barnsley to do similar, given maybe they haven't got a similar depth of squad and maybe you could argue that the form they're in isn't particularly great? So Valérien Ismaël might want a full-strength team to go out and recapture that winning feeling ahead of the playoffs. What's your view?
Yeah, he certainly wasn't happy with they got beat 2-0 at Preston last weekend. And he basically said it was entirely down to mentally they'd switched off and the concentration wasn't there. And he basically talked about trying to get that intensity back this weekend to take into the playoffs. So, excuse me. So whether that lends itself to, the sort of performance we saw in the League and Cup meetings where they were very in your face and really pushed Norwich back, who knows? But no, I think he's probably going to rest his key players because you just can't take the gamble, can you? You get an injury tomorrow and you're out of a Brentford or Swansea game. That's a huge blow.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's a difficult one in terms of of risk, isn't it, for Barnsley? Because ultimately, even though tomorrow they don't have a lot to play for, they've then got to refocus as well for the playoffs. And I think they can still technically finish fourth, but I think the goal difference swing means that realistically it's going to be fifth or sixth. So it looks like it's going to be Brentford or Bournemouth, I think, at the moment, who are in fourth. I'll double check that. But in terms of wanting to play Barnsley, I don't think any team in the playoffs is going to want. It's Swansea currently in fourth, my bad. But it's no team is going to want to face Barnsley, I think, with the intensity and their style of play. So it's going to be interesting to see how that. How that's approached. Shaney on Periscope, thanks for watching, Shane. He said, sad not to see Alex Tettey get a testimonial, but I hear he isn't bothered about having one. Is it less about sort of him being bothered about having one and more maybe an insight into his modesty and how he perhaps prefer to leave quietly? Is that's kind of the indication I get, rather than maybe him not being too bothered about one?
Yeah, I think that's the character, isn't it? That he's such a down-to-earth character, so self-effacing, self-deprecating. Yeah, I think it's really just about the character himself. But I did like Daniel's line today that, they haven't been able to have the parties this time around, but if they stay up next season, they'll have a big party and they'll get Alex and Mario back and Xavi Quintilla. So maybe we could have the Tettey-emonial next summer. That'd be nice.
Yeah, the testimonial. Yeah, that would be good, wouldn't it? And no doubt, I'm sure the club have plans in place in terms of what they're going to do next season to celebrate him. Lots of Tettey memories in here. Craig has pointed out that Tettey toe poke at Manchester United, which I think we have a picture of, actually, which I may be able to bring up here, against his boyhood club. Of course, he's a Man United fan and admitted that was a bit of a surreal one. And then, of course, there was this one against Sunderland, that moment where pretty much the whole of Carrow Road was urging him not to shoot on that occasion. And that was the one occasion where he did, and it flew into the top corner. And what a goal it was. Maybe just behind Johnny Howson's in terms of goal of the decade at Carrow Road, certainly for the period between 2010 and 2020. But some strike that. There was also the one against Preston, wasn't there? I think someone said of the 8 or 9 goals he scored for Norwich City, only one of them came in the penalty area, which was, I think, against Bournemouth in the Premier League last season. So that's an incredible statistic. Train spotter Luke said Tettey is the one player I'll miss. Ben Trafford, anything in the room of Norwich being in for that Turkish fella? I presume you mean the midfielder. I think we've spoken about him before, haven't we? So I see Oliver Dixon has asked about links to midfielders. We, of course, saw the one yesterday again. It keeps resurfacing. Will Volks, which is, I think, a player they were linked with back during when he was playing with Rotherham a couple of years ago before he moved to Cardiff, was linked again by, I think, the Daily Mail in March. He's been linked again today by the Wales Online, or yesterday rather, by the Wales Online newspaper. I think linked Norwich, Newcastle and Sheffield United, I think. So what do you think of that Will Volks sort of rumour and speculation, Pad? Do you think in terms of maybe not necessarily him, but in terms of profile and that more physical edge that they're trying to give to the squad, that is kind of the focus this summer?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, he's one that seems to be getting serially linked. I don't think we're led to believe there's too much in that in terms of tangible links. I mean, you might want to talk here, Connor. I thought that was an excellent piece you did on the physical aspect of their recruitment and how they are. I mean, that follows on from Stuart Webber, obviously, when they came out of the Premier League, said whatever it is about the technical aspects and the quality and fitting Daniel's methodology, the first almost attribute is that power, that physicality, and it sounds like, that in terms of Norwich's recruitment this window, maybe previous windows that have just gone, they're really highlighting that physical aspect, and that will clearly flow into this position on the pitch, particularly that Ollie Skip isn't the biggest, but he is some athlete, and the way he gets around the pitch, the way he put fires out and close down, that sheer athleticism in this area of the pitch particularly is going to be a pretty highly valued commodity this summer.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely the focus, isn't it? I remember a moment in the Premier League after Project Restart, and we obviously had the drinks breaks, didn't we, when football came back, and Norwich were playing West Ham in particular, and I think there was a moment against Burnley as well, and both sets of players both came to the side of the pitch, and just in terms of stature and physicality, I mean, Norwich looked like school children, didn't they, compared playing fully grown men who developed. That's kind of what it had looked like. And there was a nice anecdote as well from Todd Cantwell about the opening day of the season, where he said he controlled the ball, he received the ball and controlled it with his first first touch, and by the time he'd actually looked up, Jordan Henderson was 30 yards away when he took the touch, and as soon as he looked up to go and play a pass, Henderson was breathing down the neck of him, and that's kind of it, isn't it? That's what Norwich City need to look for as well, without losing the fundamentals of what they're trying to do. So it's about recruiting players who can maybe sprint harder, who can tackle harder, who can assert their physicality to a better extent, but also are technically good enough to play the style of football that Daniel Farke wants to create, which isn't an easy kind of blend to get, is it? Because I think when you associate technical football, you think about technical football, you think about maybe players like Mo Light and Mario Vrancic as a good example. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they approach that. But ultimately as well, that might be the reason why players like Mario Vrancic aren't being kept on, because of that lack of mobility. And we know energy was a big thing they were looking for in the midfield, hence Ollie Skip. So it's going to be fascinating to see how they do it. Do you get the sense, Pad, from everything we're sort of hearing, reading, coming out of the club, that those lessons are or have been learned? And certainly, I guess we've only got really the two conversations that Stuart Webber's spoken about in terms of recruitment. Do you feel like there is going to be a different, not a different sort of type of player arriving, but certainly a different approach to recruitment maybe than 2 seasons ago?
Yeah, and to be honest, Connor, I think, last summer you started to see that filtering into the process. Ben Gibson, Jordan Hugill, 2 powerful, players who aren't going to take a backward step in terms of the physical aspect of it. Certainly in Ben Gibson's case, obviously he has that technical aspect to his defending as well. So maybe he's the prototype, that player who physically and athletically is able to handle the demands that will be placed on Norwich in the Premier League, but still is able to, in his case, step into midfield and obviously be so important to Norwich, triggering their play. So, yeah, there's no doubt about it that they felt they lacked in that area. You've drawn that very pertinent analogy with the West Ham players that day. And that wasn't an isolated incident, was it? There was a lot of games where, I remember Palace as well, they had some big units when they turned up at Carrow Road, and 1 or 2 of these other teams as well. And you really, without that, it's going to be very hard. As Norwich discovered over the entire piece, yes, they started off very well with Tribal and Leitner and those lovely, intricate passing motions. But over the entire piece, I remember West Ham again popped into my head when Norwich went to the Olympic Stadium that day. I think it was only a 2-0 defeat. It was the Zimmerman game and the Sebastian Haller challenge. But Norwich's midfield that day was Leitner and Tribal, and it was just parting of the sea. It was the amount of attacks that came through those areas from West Ham that day. And that, I guess, is what Norwich are loath or desperate to avoid this time round. They're a far more, without the ball, certainly, robust outfit and able to, as they've demonstrated admirably this season with Ollie Skip there and Kenny McLean, Lucas Rupp, they can offer that protection to the back four and, as a result, give themselves that solid platform then to allow their more technically gifted players in those attacking 4 areas, particularly the pitch, the licence to go and play. And I think that, as much as it's about recruitment and the type of player, it's also about the balance of the side as well. So, yeah, I think I wouldn't say we're suddenly going to see a sea change in terms of the recruitment and what they're looking for this summer. I think it's just going to be maybe an acceleration from what we saw last summer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting point by Arthur on YouTube. He says Skip's injury may ward off other suitors in the Premier League without him having a pre-season possible silver lining. Absolutely, it's going to be interesting to see how that one pans out for all the various reasons. Steve has just said on Facebook we are staying up, so let's hope there's some truth to that statement for sure. An interesting question from Craig Brown here on Facebook. He said who would play in the number 10 role if Kieran Dow gets injured next season? And I think we're beginning slowly to see Kieran Dow really come to the fore, aren't we? I mean, 5 goals in his last 9 games, which 5 goals is the same amount that Todd Cantwell has scored this season. I mean, is slowly beginning to see contributions, and you can kind of forget. I know we've spoken about him maybe drifting in and out of games, but if he's going to continue to score goals at the rate he currently is, then maybe that's something that can be forgiven.
Absolutely, yeah. He's done a good interview today. Obviously, came from the Merseyside area, and he's done a good piece with Liverpool Echo, which we picked up, and it's on the Pink, and he talks there about kind of finding a home from home in terms of the club, because we obviously know his backstory when he came to Norwich last summer, that he'd had all these loan spells in the Championship, never really been able to establish himself at his parent club, Everton, or really in these Championship loan moves. And he comes to Norwich. He gets that environment put around him where Stuart Webber said in that piece today that Stuart Webber had actually known him when Stuart was at Liverpool. He was a 12 or 13-year-old. He was obviously with Liverpool's academy, is what I read into that originally, even though he came through subsequently with their great rivals, Cross Stanley Park. But, Stuart was talking about that when they wanted to sign him last summer. Daniel Farker, I'm sure, would have been very persuasive as well. And he can also see, I'm sure, even in a team who were going the wrong way in the Premier League, but the style of football would suit him as an individual. And again, he talked in that interview today about the interplay with Buendia and Cantwell and how they're just really good, intelligent, technically gifted attacking midfielders. And there's no doubt about it. He has really hit a nice seam of goal scoring and productivity. And that was, as we all know, 2 seasons ago. Andre Duda experiment failed spectacularly. Marco Stiepermann, didn't make the step up as we'd all hoped he would do. Talking of Everton, who was tried there in that away game, Kenny McLean was tried in the number 10 and actually played well that day at Goodison. But as a longer-term option, Daniel didn't see him in that role. So to answer the question, yeah, that would be a concern if Kieran Dowell got himself injured. But you do think that, again, is another area of recruitment they will now look to do something and just add a bit of extra competition. Because also, as much as we're now starting maybe to see a little bit more of Kieran Dowell's influence on this side, he is very unproven in the Premier League. So there's an element of, even if he's fit and he's firing and he continues tomorrow, where he's left off in the last few games, he isn't proven at Premier League level. So for that reason, I'm quite interested to see what direction they go in the market to bolster what was proven 2 seasons ago to be an absolutely fundamental part of the team. If Norwich don't have that creativity, that goal and assist threat, and that link to Pukki week in and week out in the Premier League, it's going to be a very difficult task. So, that I think for me is probably that / what they do striker-wise is probably the most intriguing part of the summer transfer window for me, for it in terms of incomings for Norwich.
You've mentioned there perhaps some players who, and Marco Stiepermann again is one of these. Christoph Zimmermann you can throw into, I guess, even Onel Hernandez as well. Players who maybe didn't step up in the manner that perhaps some hoped. Norwich obviously kept a lot of the squad. I think they at Anfield on the opening day of the Premier League season last season, it was 11 faces, wasn't it? That all of which who were in the squad, no new signings at all. There was a lot of loyalty running throughout what they were trying to do. It feels this time like maybe that's gone to an extent, and we've certainly seen that, I think, with the decisions made on Tettey and Vrancic this week. But in terms of Stiepermann, Zimmermann, Hernandez, etc., are these players that Norwich are looking at and going, okay, they weren't good enough last time, but that was as starters. So if you've got them within the squad somewhere, then is there a bigger argument for them sticking around? How do you see it?
What, with Stiepermann specifically, or
well, all of those, I suppose. Stiepermann, Zimmermann, Hernandez, but yeah, if you want to talk about Stiepermann specifically, go for it.
Well, I mean, yeah, they're definitely. I mean, just in terms of pure headcount, they need those type of players around and in the building. But as much as we said, it wasn't enough of a reason to keep Alex Tettey around. I think those lads, by definition, are a bit. There's a bit more mileage left in their careers, and they are obviously quite clearly in terms of their influence around the camp and their, the professionalism as well. You talk about Zimmermann. He's the ultimate professional. So I think I wouldn't construct any argument really for, in a summer that might contain a lot of flux anyway in terms of one or two of the top players moving on and whatever they do inward. I'm not sure you'd want to inject another degree of unpredictability if you were to maybe sanction Zimmermann, Stiepermann, Hernandez, Poeta, those sort of players. I think they're going to need that depth, and clearly, yes, those lads. I don't think anybody sees them as regular Premier League options, but inevitably, injuries and suspensions will bite, and those type of players would have to step in. And that was one of the keys this time around, that when they had those, they were able to deal with it. And of course, it's a far harder proposition in the Premier League, but No, I don't see any of those, and Robert would be another one I put in that category as well. I think you're going to need those type of characters in and around the place for many reasons, in terms of the influence around the place, and in terms of, you know, just the squad dynamic, and having enough of a squad. Because, you know, you could say, well, hold on, you've got Ida, you've got Omar Daly, you've got maybe Famewo, Josh Martin, Barley Mumba, but I think to tilt it too far to the youth in terms of your fringe element, I think that would be a big error as well, because, you know, it's an unforgiving league, that Premier League. Norwich discovered that to their cost last 2 seasons ago. And that's maybe the final thing I'd say is that Zimmerman, Stiepermann, Hernandez all were in that Premier League experience. And okay, it didn't go on well on a personal level for a lot of them, but they'll have that experience to draw on this time around. So, yeah, I don't see any of those getting jettisoned personally. Now, if you're saying, could you see, if we got halfway through the season, like a Poeta, for example, if he's not playing any football, could you go and get him some loan football? Well, yes, I could probably see that, but not from the outset. I think Daniel would want to keep most of those on board, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so unforgiving, isn't it? Particularly for a young player. Sometimes it can do a little bit more damage than you would hope. Just a little bit of news breaking in relation to, of course, the ill-fated Super League. It's been announced by UEFA that 9 of the 12 clubs who have pulled away from the competition, they're going to lose 5% of their European competition revenue for one season. The 3 remaining clubs who are obviously haven't yet pulled out of the project, which is Juventus, Barcelona and Real Madrid, are all going to face further disciplinary action. So it's going to be interesting to see what that is. But in terms of those 9 clubs, just a 5% loss in revenue that they're going to suffer as a result of that scheme, which is interesting. But there you go. I just thought I'd bring that to you. A few more comments. Arthur again on YouTube. Neil Morpay took Brighton forward, as did McBurney for Sheffield United. Ollie Watkins for Aston Villa. Premium Championship strikers can be crucial in establishing sides in the Premier League. For Norwich, Ivan Toney may be a stretch, but what about Adam Armstrong? I think it would come down to finance, wouldn't it? And I'm not sure if the domestic market, particularly this summer, given EFL clubs aren't really going to have a lot of markets to play with. That's going to be very, very hard to do, I think, any business in, really. Dubai Canaries kind of asked the question that you touched upon there, Pad, about Procetta maybe being given an opportunity to go out on loan to a championship club. What are your thoughts on that? It felt like we were beginning to see him become something, and then obviously got injured, and since that point we've not really seen the same player, I guess. What do you think Norwich City decide to do with him? I guess partly in my mind I'm thinking about Todd Cantwell a couple of seasons ago, where he maybe didn't quite click and then came back in pre-season a completely different beast. Now we don't know if that's going to happen with Shemi or not, but it's going to be interesting to see, I guess, the decisions made around him and whether Stuart Webber and Daniel Farke feel like he does need a loan at this point.
Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but Poland are in the Euros, aren't they? And he's been in and around their squad in the qualifiers. So, you know, we might be talking about a lad who goes off to the Euros with Poland, really. So that tells me that he's got something about him. No, I don't see, as I say, the only scenario I could see is if we got halfway through the season and he's not kicked a ball, then it's pretty clear he's not going to be featuring for Norwich next season in the Premier League. At that point, that's not a bad shout. Go and get him a championship loan, for example. But I think that is a fair point you made about, certainly for overseas players as well. You know, Mario and Marco, Daniel always maintained that first season, there was questions asked about those. They hadn't really adapted, or at least shown enough evidence they'd adapted to English football. But thereafter, you know, that championship title win the first time around, they were, well, Mario at the end and Marco all the way through with his double act with Timu. And again, I know, caveat, we're going into the Premier League. It's not another season of championship football, but I think they'd certainly want to get him in for pre-season and just see if that adaptation period he's had, he'll go away, I'm sure, over the summer and maybe refocus. And, you know, if he's the type of lad who will look at the areas he needs to improve on and come back. And pre-season is an opportunity for a player like that, certainly to maybe convince Daniel and Stuart, no, we'll keep you in the building, at least for now. And then you never know then. Once you're in at the start of the season, you get an injury or two, you come off the bench, you do something notable. You get your confidence from that, and you never look back, do you? A little bit like Cantwell did, how he grasped his opportunity in the Premier League. But I think he's got a lot of work to do because he has fallen away, from a fairly positive start to his career. But, Kieran Dow would be on a similar path. And now we're talking about him in terms of, he looks like the nailed-on option for the 10. And that's only literally over what he's done over the last sort of 9 or 10 games, really. So it can turn very quickly. But, it would be a surprise to see him playing a major leading role in that, certainly that first part of the season next season.
I'll play devil advocates on Plachetto and say maybe there's an argument that he could be a more useful option for Norwich City in the Premier League, given that they're not going to have as much as the ball, given that they're probably going to have to counter-attack and there's going to be perhaps more pace or more space rather to exploit. Maybe his pace will be a very genuine option. But I agree. At the moment, every time I'm watching him, he's probably a little bit short of maybe where he would need to be for Norwich City to be an option in the Premier League. We'll take a couple more questions and then we're going to talk about something very interesting that we've got planned for you on Sunday evening. We'll go to Matt Bradshaw, who has said, what do you think the situation will be next season with Danel Sinani? Is it believed he can play the Vrancic role? He's been playing for Vosland Beveren, I think, who are bottom of the Belgian Pro League. He's been playing as a striker in a 3-5-2. He's maybe not had the football he would have wanted, still remained a regular for Luxembourg. I think he came out fairly recently, Pad, and said that the plan was for him to get a championship loan, wasn't it? So do you expect that to be kind of his next step, a loan into the English pyramid, and kind of see how he gets on from there?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, as you say, he was quoted in a Belgian newspaper that was the plan. So, we will take him at his word. And, it probably does need to happen in this country now, a little bit like Sebastian Soto, really. They obviously allowed him to go out to Holland, and he caught the eye there, albeit at a lower level in Holland. And you would think he probably is earmarked for a domestic loan as well, because ultimately it's about trying to bring them as close as they can to Norwich's first 11, and that's going to be incredibly difficult in those two cases, because the first 11 now next season onwards will be a Premier League 11. So I think it has to be Championship. I think anything lower, if your first team is at Premier League level, if you've got players placed at League One or below, or an equivalent level maybe on the continent, that's not going to be good enough. You're not going to have any chance really of bringing those type of players through. So they have to be pushed, and a decent Championship loan, I think, would do that, because then obviously if you swim rather than sink at Championship level, then there is a viable case that maybe the following season you could be in and around it for Norwich's first team. But in the short term, no, we won't be seeing him in Norwich's Premier League plans, I don't think.
Agreed. Just a couple more questions then, and then we'll go to what we're going to talk about in the last 5 minutes. Colin Anderson, are you expecting business to be done early again? I'll answer that just by saying yes. I think that's very likely. Norwich tend to be, I think, quick and brave are the words they tend to live by in terms of recruitment. So I would be shocked if we don't see things move fairly quickly after Barnsley. And then we'll go to this final comment, which is interesting. Let me just find it, from Matt Gregory on YouTube, who has said, do you think Daniel may go free at the back more in the Premier League to allow more protection to the fullbacks? He couldn't really do it last time, as we had no fit centre-back options for most of the season. He has tried it, hasn't he, throughout different times since arriving at Norwich, but we've seen increasingly perhaps a desire to play this 4-2-3-1, 4-1-4-1 at times, maybe when Norwich don't have the ball. Do you think he will view that as an option? And if so, will that increase the amount of centre-backs maybe that Norwich look to take into next season? Maybe people are talking about 4 rather. Could we see Norwich with 5 centre-backs maybe if they keep on with Amadelli around? I mean, it's an interesting sort of talking point, I guess, about flexibility in terms of being able to do what they couldn't do last time. Weber obviously spoke about variation, didn't he? And Daniel maybe not having the tools. Is that something you see maybe them looking to change this time?
Yes and no. I think I don't see as Daniel likes to call it, the base formation. I don't think he would necessarily veer away from 4 at the start of games. But he showed liberally this season, when it needed it to be dictated that way, or they had an injury or whatever, he would go to a 3 within games. And Max Aarons would be pushed into wing-back role. I remember Ollie Skip having to drop into a 3 on more than one occasion. that's a fair point. He would have tried it probably a bit more if he'd have had the available personnel in terms of established centre-back options. That's probably been really denied to him in the last 2 or 3 seasons. So that's probably why we haven't seen a lot of it in terms of an actual, here's 3 established centre-backs playing in a 3-5 or whatever. So, but no, I don't see, because that's quite a fundamental tactical shift to have basically swept to another championship title with a 4.
And with a very good defensive record as well.
Exactly. An excellent defensive record. And yes, we know the level goes up considerably, but no, I don't see it from the outset. I don't see suddenly Norwich being unveiled as a defensive 3 operation. But there's no doubt that within games, and maybe that element of keeping opponents off balance a little bit, yeah, I could see him doing it. And that is a fair point you make in terms of that if you can conceive you could go with a 3, does it raise the prospect of Bamidele staying in the building? We're talking a lot here about the Sananis and the Poetas, Soto as well. Do they need to go out? Adamida, you could even debate, do they need to go out? But if Daniel at the back of his head thinks there might be occasions when we can play with a 3, whether it's within game or whether it's the odd game, I think that probably increases the chances of that young man staying on the journey, because what we've seen so far, he hasn't been phased. So, it's probably reasonable to expect he would take the next step as well in his stride, albeit, again, a huge test of his fairly fledgling career. But, we know they want a centre-back. They're being linked ad infinitum with centre-backs left, right,
with
centre.
anyone.
So, yeah, anybody who's got centre-back on their bio. But so Zimmerman's staying, Gibson will be staying, Hanley's staying. You bring in a 4th centre-back. Tim Closer isn't in the equation. It's just a case of, do you keep one of potentially Bamidele or Famewo? And for me, it'd be Bamidele because, he's walked through the door, to use Daniel's analogy with young players. So, but no, a long-winded way of saying I don't think we'll be seeing a 3 from Daniel Farke in the Premier League.
I thought he was excellent last week, and the only doubt in my mind about maybe Bamidele getting a loan is his age. He's only 18. Training with a Premier League outfit every week would be a massive step up, wouldn't it? So it's going to be interesting. We'll leave the chat there for this evening. What we're going to do now is show you a trailer of something we've got planned on Sunday, and then maybe we'll give you a little bit of probably not much of an idea of what we've got planned at this stage. But here you go. Watch this. It's certainly going to be interesting. And this was to be a summer like no other this club has seen before.
The Championship is absolutely brutal.
You've got to be a good enough team to then regather, regroup, potentially lose some key players, and then come back again.
They're trying to do it in the right way. There are ways to win that aren't attractive. And I don't think that's the future of football.
The foundations for that transition last summer were laid over the previous 2 or 3 years. I think without that, it would have been much harder to do it last summer.
Literally, the foot went back on the accelerator and basically broke the wheel of those teams, the Brentfords and the Swanseas.
With doors closed, turnstiles shut, and expectations still as high as ever. Because in August, every team expects that they're going to win the league, but for Norwich City, those were very genuine ambitions amongst supporters. But hidden amongst all of that was keeping the disappointment away and making sure this season contained numerous good times. There you go, Sunday, 6 p.m. The Pink and Channels are going to be the place to be. Pad, I'm not sure how much we can give away purely because there are still elements that are still TBC, but it's worth people standing by their various devices, isn't it, on Sunday for what should be, hopefully, a very good evening of Norwich City content and of Norwich City celebration.
What else are you going to be doing? I mean, Line of Duty's finished now, isn't it? I must confess I didn't watch it, so the horrendous finale, from what I can gather on social media, completely passed me by. But
me too, actually.
There you go. In the absence of Line of Duty, nothing else on. I'm not really selling it by saying it that way, am I? But ultimately, what we hope it will be is just plenty of live elements. As you say, a bit TBC at this stage, but what we can probably say is that there is a documentary your good self has done a lot of work on, Tony, behind the scenes here, our video man. And that alone will be worth watching. But we're hoping that's one part of a better than country file. Agreed, my friend. Agreed. Well, I don't know. Maybe not. If you're into rural farming matters, then maybe not. But
yeah, there's no sheep in the documentary apart from Derby, I suppose.
No, there's a joke there. I can't think of one off the top of my head. In an ideal scenario, yeah, we'll have a documentary of the season, and we've seen some of the talking heads we've got involved in that. I don't know if do we want to let on about a rather inspiring piece of poetry read by a certain very famous Norfolk fan. Absolutely.
I think we'll leave that there.
How could we name him without? If we just sort of said Lord Melchett, then you could probably guess who we're talking about, or the former host of QI. We'll leave that there. But he's basically involved as well. So, and then we're hoping, there might be one or two of the current squad as well who come on as well. So, all in all, really, it will be. Bearing in mind that the title is presented to Grant Hanley on Saturday at Barnsley, better than Ed Sheeran all day long. Yeah, we'll get a shirt with some hieroglyphics on maybe as well. That's what we'll do. But ultimately, on a weekend where they are finally given the Football League trophy, it's just we hope tying it all together. That was the season that was. Wallow in a bit of a season unlike any other, and then that'll put it to bed. We'll finish on Sunday, and then we'll get up on Monday, and we'll start looking forward to the Premier League. So yeah, if you want to stretch out the title and party and promotion celebrations, Pinken on all our social media channels from 6 o'clock onwards.
There you go, a bit of a throwback from DW, who's obviously watching the early preview shows when we used to have those little videos about facts and figures. But Tony used them all up by about week 10, I think, didn't he? So we're all out of those. But it should be an epic, hopefully, night of programming. That there'll be a charity link there as well, won't there, Pad? So there's going to be plenty for people to get involved with and to keep their eyes peeled, and hopefully, like we say, a few more sort of tricks up our sleeve that we can reveal hopefully before Sunday evening, but still very TBC to at this moment. Still a lot of work to be done, isn't there, on various aspects, but I think regardless of what happens from here, it's going to be, certainly for Norwich City fans, a very good night of content. So hopefully we'll see as many of you there as possible. Tell all your friends and anyone of a Norwich City persuasion where we are at 6 o'clock Sunday evening across our various channels, whether you're watching Facebook, YouTube or Twitter. We're hoping to bring it to you on all of those platforms. But as we say, still a lot of aspects up in the air, but it's our job to put it together before Sunday. Pad, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you all very much for watching, not just tonight, but across the course of the season. Sophie is looking forward to it, which is good. Matt with a nice comment as well. So thank you very much for your kind words, Matt. We've done our best. Pad, you're going to be at Oakwell tomorrow. It's going to be a weird game in many respects, because what does it mean, really? So
99, Connor. That's what it means. 99, mate.
Yeah, there we go. We should have played that song to play us out, really. Just very quickly, Pad, score prediction for tomorrow, if you've got any sort of insight to offer. I mean, you can just pluck it out of thin air if you want.
Well, I'll do what I normally do. Yeah, pluck it at 2-2, mate. I think it's a draw all day long. Neither side will have the intensity they need for various reasons. An honourable shake hands, and then let's get the party going again.
Lovely stuff. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. Pinken.com, the place to go. We'll see you Sunday night, hopefully, as many of you as possible for that content. And enjoy your weekends.